It was 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world is supposed to be quiet, when the only thing moving is the second hand on a clock somewhere, ticking toward nothing in particular. But on November 9th, 1979, inside the underground nerve center of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, an alarm shattered that silence, and what appeared on the screens in front of bleary-eyed military analysts would stop every heart in that room cold. 220 missiles, Soviet, inbound, heading directly for the United States. Not one or two, not a test ping. 220 intercontinental ballistic missiles, the kind that carry nuclear warheads capable of erasing entire cities in seconds. The computers weren't glitching, the data wasn't ambiguous. Every system in that room was screaming the same thing. This is it. This is the attack everyone feared. This is how the world ends. The analysts had minutes, maybe less, because that's the brutal math of nuclear war. Once those missiles are in the air, you have roughly 20 minutes before impact. And if you're going to fire back, you have to decide fast. Hesitate too long, and your own missiles are buried under rubble. You either launch now, or you lose everything. Phones began ringing across Washington. Senior military officials were jolted awake. The duty officer reached out to satellite systems and radar stations to cross-check what the computers were reporting. Strategic Air Command was put on a higher state of alert. Bomber crews across the country were scrambled to their aircraft. The gears of nuclear retaliation, built over decades, rehearsed thousands of times, had begun to turn.
But here's the thing about a system designed to end the world. Once you start it moving, stopping it requires just as much certainty as starting it. The duty officer had a protocol, and that protocol had one critical check: independent confirmation. Before any recommendation to launch could be made to the president, before the chain of command could be fully activated, the early warning data had to be verified by satellite surveillance. Because NORAD's computers were fast, but they weren't infallible. And somewhere in the back of that room, in the mind of at least one trained analyst, a question flickered, small, almost imperceptible, but present. Is this real? The satellite data came back, clean. No heat signatures from missile launches over Soviet territory. No contrails, no thermal bloom rising off a launch pad. Nothing. The screens at NORAD were lit up with the end of the world, and the sky above the Soviet Union was completely silent. The alert was stood down, the scrambled bombers were recalled, the phone calls stopped, and within minutes, one of the most dangerous moments in human history quietly dissolved back into the 3 a.m. dark, unknown to the public, unreported, unannounced. Just another shift at NORAD. The cause, when investigators found it, was almost laughably small. A technician had inserted a training tape, a simulation of a full-scale Soviet missile attack, used for exercises, into the system. It fed directly into the live warning network. The computers couldn't tell the difference between a drill and the real thing. 220 Phantom missiles, born from a piece of magnetic tape, had nearly ended civilization.
This wasn't the only time it happened. 6 months later, in June 1980, another false alarm rippled through the same system, this time caused by a faulty 46-cent computer chip. Once again, bomber crews were scrambled. Once again, the world teetered on the edge for several long, breathless minutes. Once again, the confirmation systems held, barely. Think about that. The distance between a peaceful morning and a nuclear exchange was, on at least 2 occasions, a training tape and a chip that cost less than a cup of coffee. We talk about the Cold War in the past tense as though it was always going to turn out this way, as though the world was never really in danger. But the men inside NORAD on November 9, 1979, didn't know how the story ended. They were standing in real time, in the dark, with their hands over the most destructive weapons ever built, trying to decide if the numbers on their screens were true. They got it right. They hesitated just long enough. They asked the one question that mattered: is this confirmed? And because they did, because a handful of people in a buried command center chose doubt over certainty in a moment that demanded both, you are here, reading this, breathing. The Cold War nearly ended humanity not with ideology, not with ambition, not even with hatred, but with a mistake, with a tape in the wrong machine and a chip that gave out, with the terrifying fragility of the systems we built to protect us. We didn't survive the nuclear age because we were wise. We survived it because, in the moments that counted most, someone paused, and the math, just barely, came out in our favor. The missiles were never real, but the silence after, that silence was.